Indian Navy and Air Force. Budget cuts have hit the Indian Navy's plans from a total of 200 ships in 2027 to mere 175. Further acquisitions of P-81 maritime surveillance aircraft, which has proved so useful in the Ladakh imbroglio, too may be reduced. Questioning whether the Navy should go ahead with its planned third aircraft carrier, suggesting that it may suggest that better make greater use of Indian airfields and the island territories. And now, of course, we have various pacts which countries have various bases in southern Indian Ocean, Indo-Pacific, and right up to Djibouti, can be an acceptable substitute. The peninsula itself is a aircraft carrier, although fixed, and can be used with hard shelters. These developments contrast with China's military modernization program. This included the establishment of fully integrated theater commands in 2016, bringing together the Army, Air Force, Navy, and rocket forces. There's a slide now on your screens which shows the various Chinese commands. This is just, it's not scale to map, but just a picture of what the commands are like. Australia has a big stake in the ability of Indian military and particularly its Navy. Now the Quad, it is virtually coming into being. It's only a matter of formal signatures in the month of October next month. And then it comes into being. The query to ask is, will the CDS make any difference in decision making? I would like to say here that the border guarding capability involves acquiring better and latest platforms of intelligence, air power, war fighting, hybrid war, and tools like cyber and information warfare. This border guarding capability of the Army involves acquiring better and latest platforms of intelligence too. More modern platforms and weapons are no good if they can not reach the point of application in the desired time frame. Hence the need to improve our road infrastructure and border, which is an urgent imperative. And this too, the BRO organization must be brought under the control of the CDS. An unresolved border is a sensitive issue that requires constant monitoring. It calls for a synergetic and integrated approach from all stakeholders, intelligence agencies. It is important to integrate their operational employment for optimum results. The best to do this arguably is by establishing Joint Theatre Command. It will also define a clear line of authority and accountability. The theatre commander with a focused responsibility will provide leadership with a clear assessment and firm operational recommendations. Chief of Defence Staff has already been given the mandate to establish these commands. Winston Churchill famously said during World War II, "Never let a good crisis go waste." The present face-off is also an opportunity that must be seized to accelerate the establishment of a Joint Theatre Command that is responsible for northern borders in a manner that we have more coordinated responses at national level. The appointment of CDS, the single point of advice to the RM, the best person which could lay down the guidelines and pave a path as to how this appointment will be useful to the nation, simultaneously taking care of the interest of the armed forces. Care needs to be taken not to start taking verbatim instructions from the political and bureaucratic leadership, thus and impinging upon the armed forces. With this, I would like to hand over the proceedings to the panelists. The first panelist is General Shankar Roy Chaudhary, who has been our chief in the 80s. General Shankar Roy Chaudhary, sir, your talk. Shankar Roy Chaudhary sir, can you hear me? I think Shankar Roy Chaudhary is not online as yet. Johnny sir?
He's
can
online.
You take on your post?
He's online, so make him unmute.
Roy Chaudhary sir, unmute yourself, sir. So just tap the mic at the lower end. Can we unmute him from here? No. Roy Chaudhary sir, can you unmute yourself?
Now he has left the meeting.
Huh?
He's now left the meeting. He's not in the meeting now.
He's not in the meeting now?
Yeah, he has left the meeting.
He has
Johnny
clicked
sir,
the phone symbol by mistake.
Johnny sir, can you start on your talk, sir? We'll give him the chance later, sir.
Okay. And there is a very common saying. Firstly, good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be with you. I hope there's no media listening and we're all in house. Anyway, there is a very common saying that you shouldn't wash your dirty linen in public. However, as far as I'm concerned, this is not public. And at the same time,
Sir,
if one doesn't criticize the system, if one does not criticize the system, we cannot progress.
Sir,
so I am afraid I am going to be concentrating.
The microphone screen, sir.
And I'm starting with Kargil.
Only the microphone.
I took over 15 core.
In color.
Came initially.
Now, sir, don't do it, sir. Now, General Mukherjee is speaking. I will call you in after he is finished.
Mute yourself, Arun. In the middle of Kargil, I had opportunity to go through everything. What had actually happened?
Coffee.
It is the higher defense organization, right from Delhi down to 15 core and surroundings, that had failed, and failed on the intelligence front. That is why Kargil took place. I shift parallel from Kargil straight on to Ladakh. Exactly the same thing has been repeated. So you can make any amount of organizations you want. But unless you have the correct man at the correct place, and you make yourself functional accordingly, you're going to fail. So I'm going to start with the top. At the top of the organization, you are supposed to have a cabinet committee on security, headed by the Prime Minister of India. Whether it be UPA government, whether it be an NDA government, I am afraid this committee has been non-functional or a rubber stamp. The heads of the armed forces are also supposed to be part of this committee when the cabinet committee on security so chooses. Officially, that remains the case. But if you take Ladakh, if you take Kargil, they never came in till much later. So I am afraid this needs reorganization. The next is the National Security Council. Just in name. You may select the best person as the NSA, but unless he is advised correctly, nothing will happen. Who is supposed to provide inputs to the National Security Council? The Joint Intelligence Committee, as good as disbanded today. So you have a non-functional JIC. That JIC is also supposed to give inputs to the Chiefs of Staff Committee. Is it doing so? Did it do so for Ladakh? Did it do so for Kargil? They are supposed to analyze all intelligence inputs that come in and give a feedback. All inputs were there during Ladakh. All inputs are there for Kargil, for Ladakh and Kargil. They are then supposed to integrate these inputs, analyze these inputs, and then report their findings after due analysis. They failed to do so. That is supposed to be fed to the NSA. It is a failure on our part. Had those been interpreted properly, then we could have deployed forward well in time and prevented the PLA from occupying the areas they came into. We just had to selectively occupy heights in time. We have failed. Again, now you've got a new funny organization come up. Defense Planning Committee, headed by the NSA. Illogical. If you have got a functional NSA and a functional National Security Committee, then why do you need a Defense Planning Committee? And along with this, who is responsible for defense of India? Arun gave it out. Defense of India is the responsibility of Defense Secretary. How can that be? That is from the days of the realm. It should be the Cabinet Committee on Security, headed by the Cabinet Secretary, because all elements of the country have to come into play for defense of the country. The Chiefs of Staff Committee at the moment have been left toothless and non-functional. As I said, JIC already non-functional. The army has stripped itself of intelligence. It stripped itself of intelligence. You tell me, do we have a functional intelligence organization now? So what if something went wrong earlier? It is time we re-equip ourselves to get our intelligence going. After all, when you take Ladakh or Kargil, this is an intelligence failure. You need to truly integrate MOD and have departments of defense, departments of navy, departments of the air force, and bring everything into that. Arun, please.
Hello. Vyaparji.
In other words, you need to have a mixed group dealing with all aspects. When I was in MS branch, there are at least 4 different sections dealing with the same subject. Superfluous, redundant. The same was with when I was in DV. You have the same duplication in MOD. These need to integrate. And you have one integrated Ministry of Defense with different departments dealing with everything. The selection of the CDS, the Chief of Army Staff, the Chief of Air Staff, and the Chief of Naval Staff, I am afraid has become a political appointment now. I may be hurting people's feelings, but it is true. It cannot be a political appointment. The best man must be appointed for the job. Not the best political man, but the best man, the most competent man. You're talking about integrated theater commands. I am all for it, but are you the United States Armed Forces? How many aircraft do you have in your inventory? Against an authorization of 42 squadrons, you have 31 squadrons. How are you going to split it? So you talk all you want about integrated theater commands. It's non-functional, not workable at this point in time. We are asking for trouble because you can't split the resources you've got. Similarly, you have to look at having feet on the ground in mountain warfare. You can't take tanks up onto the mountains. Even though you brought it up onto Depsang Plains or other areas near Pangangso, Spangur Gap and so on, but they will not fight the battle on the mountains. So you've got to have feet on the ground also, which means numbers. Yes, by all means cut. How will you cut? Remove counterinsurgency, remove counter-terrorist operations from the army. Give it to CPOs and paramilitary forces. You got plenty of them. How are you going to split the integrated theatre commands? A major issue. Who will exercise command and control? The CDS is already overburdened. Or will it be the Chief of Army Staff? If it's the Chief of Army Staff, who is he reporting to? The CDS or the Raksha Mantri? These are questions you have to answer. Very easily said. I'll have theatre commands. What nonsense. The requirement today is more of jointmanship than theatre commands. You may have the odd integrated theatre command like Andaman and Nicobar at this point of time. But we're not ready for the integrated theatre command. We don't have the resources or capability to do it. And if we try to do it, we are in further trouble than what we already are. The last point I really have is our economy is in very, very, very bad shape. We really have to resolve the economy if we need to progress and do restructuring in the fashion we want to do. Again, my apology for being so critical, but I feel very strongly about these aspects. Thank you very much, and once again, apologies.
Thank you very much, sir. Strongly worded talk. I think it was needed too. Is General Roy Chaudhary online as yet in communication with us, sir? Roy Chaudhary, sir, can you confirm? Okay, I think he's still having some problem. May I request Lieutenant General Prakash Menon from Bangalore, the director of Taxashila Institution, to come up and take on the talk, please.
Good morning and thank you for this honor and privilege. And as Brigadier Roy said, I speak from Bangalore, where the weather is what is supremely, you can say it's magnificent, and we must thank COVID-19 for that, looking at the positive part of COVID-19. So let me launch straight into what I wanted to tell you. And I'm afraid that I must disagree with my former co-commander in most of the things that he said, and at the heart of the issue that he does not agree with the idea of theatre commands. I take the opposite view. I think it's not only overdue, it is essential. How do we justify today the existence of 17 service-specific commands? What justification do we have for that? That itself is an indication that there is a restructuring which is required. And I would say this because the geography of India and the threats that it faces is better served by having theatre commands. And for that purpose, let me just put up a map. Can you tell me if you can see my screen? Do you see my screen?
No. I'm
Is
not
it loading?
seeing. No. Can we put on the
It's
other
not even
slide?
loading.
Can we put on this? I will try and put it on for you.
Please. And while it is coming up, I think the conceptual foundations of the theater system is based on the fact that
Lights.
when we cooperate in large numbers and do so flexibly, we achieve maximum military effectiveness and jointness. And I say this because
Next.
it is not the case
एक और slide है. एक और.
that India, as the Air Force argument used to run, has no expeditionary requirement, therefore did not require theater commands. That was not the argument which needs to be made.
Yeah, this first.
Yeah, I think you got that right.
Okay.
Can you right? Okay.
I can see it.
So, okay, right. So, if you look at the screen, the conceptual foundation of a theater system is that the operational commander is the theater commander. And the larger the theater, the greater resources which can be made available to him as per his requirement. And that requirement is normally based on two fundamentals, which is threat and geography. So if this system is being followed, I think what we must aim for in its application, and it is now not the case whether this theater system is good for us, this is a government mandate. It is beyond debate. The CDS has been mandated to carry this out. So the issue whether we require it or not, we are well past that stage. And what we therefore need is, how do we make it happen? Now, I've actually worked on the system and put out a paper, which is a discussion document from my institute, Takshashila. And what you see on the map is a conceptualization of how the theaters would be organized. And these theaters have been organized into four. Northern Theater for China, Western Theater for Pakistan, and two maritime-based theaters for Southwestern and Southeastern. Notably, and I think this is very important, all our theaters must have responsibility in the interland, because the theaters jump off from the interland. What you see is also the states which are going to be put under these theaters. And I think this is very important for the simple reason, I think Keshav Mathur is the one who's, can you please mute yourself? Keshav Mathur.
केशव माथुर को म्यूट कर दो यार, वो पीछे से हॉर्न आ रहा है.
So the hinterland is very important here because that is what India's geography requires. The slide has been lost.
स्लाइड वापस. स्लाइड को वापस कर दो.
Yeah, just tell him to make it full screen. Full screen. Yeah. Okay. So what you see here is 4 theaters. Now, you could say the theaters are too large, but I think the largest possible theater is what we should aim for. Mr. Keshav Mathur is still making the noise. If you can tell somebody, can tell him to. Okay. So the Northern Theater would also include Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar, and could possibly be headquartered in Kolkata. but it will not include it will not include the 14 corps in Ladakh, which will be under the Western Theatre. The logic is that geography allows movement of theatre reserves into Ladakh from the Western Theatre and not from the Northern Theatre, even when the Rohtang Tunnel is functional. So this is a requirement of geography, and also that's a place where actually there's a convergence between Pakistan and the Chinese border. Now, the Northern Theatre is fundamentally based on the mountains in the Himalayas. The Western theatres we're well aware of, but the nature of the threat in the Northern and Western Theatre are different. The nature of the Northern Theatre threat is to do fundamentally with land grabbing, salami slicing, and at the end of that extreme of the military imagination is a large-scale offensive, which I think is most unlikely unless one discounts the difficulties of feeding a large army across the Himalayas. The Western Theatre is one which should be structured so that it can hit without posturing. That means it must have all the long-range vectors and certain amount of land grab capability. Not to the extent that we want to actually dismember Pakistan by capturing large territory in Pakistan. So these two theatres, and this theatre probably could have its headquarters in Delhi, followed by the two other theatres, which is South and West. There is a case, of course, for maritime, a single maritime theatre, but I would say considering three issues. One issue is the necessity for actually being able to operate towards the east and maybe towards the west. It would be better that when you do this restructuring now, you make this into two theatres. Two, we must keep the responsibility of hinterland into consideration. And three is that whatever be the case, these theatres must not have any intermediate headquarters in between. Or all the present operations headquarters would actually come under the headquarter IDS or the Joint Chiefs, and it cannot have thereafter two commands, which is the South and the Eastern, the West and the Eastern Command under it, which means it would have had to have a separate theatre. If you have one theatre, you would be having, at the joint service level, you would be having a controlling authority, you would be having a theatre command in between, and then you will have two theatres. That means you're increasing the span of the command structure. So it is better that once you have these two, both these can actually answer to the only that which is at the headquarter IDS. So can you show the next slide, please?
Next slide.
So in my view, and I think this is very important that we understand this, and I would actually disagree with my old co-commander about the CCS. The CCS is a political body. It cannot have anybody other than represented by, in the way that it's structured now, other than anybody who's elected. But of course, it'll always have invitees depending upon, and it always does, depending upon the subject in which they're dealing with. But the decision making will always be of this Cabinet Committee on Security, which is a political body. Now, in the structure which is now given, the CDS and the DMA, and I think I must disagree with Brigadier Roy, who initially said that the report of the secretaries of these departments go through the Secretary Defense to the RM and so on. Nothing of the sort. All secretaries can report directly to the RM. In fact, the RRM is a bit of a, depending upon the ministries and their ministerial character, they give particular responsibilities. So it is more often in practice that the Department of Defense Production has been given to the RRM as a subject. So the Secretary Defense Production reports to him, but that does not mean he can't go directly to the RM. All secretaries can go directly to the RM. So the DMA, which is there now, can go directly to the RM. Now, the point I want to make is the DMA is, and of course, the CDS is now the head of the DMA. This is the level at which policy is made. And policy in this case, and there was, of course, this constant issue about how can the Defense Secretary be responsible. I would agree, now that we have a DMA, maybe the Defense of India should go to the DMA instead of the DOD. But that's just a matter of technicality, because in the end, it is the Minister of Defense who is responsible for the Defense of India. But this has been an issue which actually we have spoken about. It won't make much of a difference whether we say it is so-and-so or so. It's the minister which is responsible, and he is responsible to the cabinet. So in this particular way that they have structured it, the policy level is where the DMA is. And the military strategy level is where the headquarter IDS is, where the CDS is now double or triple hatted as the permanent chairman, chief of staff. It is also the level at which we have all the operational directorates will have to be merged, and there would be a joint operational directorate, which we have two VCDSs, as you can see. One would look after operations, the other would look after logistics, and so on. So this level is the level at which military strategy will be made, and it's also the level at which operational directions are issued. And those operational directions are issued to the theater commanders, who will then carry out the operations. He'll ask for the resources that he wants, and it will be for the level of the IDS to allocate those resources. So the important point here, it is structured to meet this flexibility that you can actually put your resources where you want it, depending upon where it is required. So I see this promoting the idea of flexible allotment and flexible application depending upon where it is required. And of course, you have these 4 theater commanders who will be 4 stars, they have to be. And in this system, as it finally comes about, the 3 chiefs will be the chiefs of the services. They will run the service. But whatever happens in that theater, as far as the operations is concerned, even the training within the theaters, especially specific training of the services, which will be looked after by the chief. So there will be a reduction when it finally comes about of what the role of the chiefs is. It is inevitable in the theater command system. The chiefs will be there, but they will have a different role. And next slide, please. Okay, so here's the system as I visualized it. First, you have the CCS. They give the strategic direction to the RM. The CDS with the DMA then makes the operational directive along with the consultations with the other secretaries. And then he provides whatever is required, and the operational director is now prepared and hatched with all the secretaries by the CDS playing a major role. But it cannot be done with other secretaries because obviously it's related to the finance and the rest of it. So this is the level at which the ministry level at which the political guidance takes place. And that is given to the headquarter IDS. There's a joint chief of staff committee at the headquarter IDS, and 3 chiefs and all are there. And the theater command, the East Theater Command, this is a generalized version, will have an independent component commander of the service. It will also have any other specialized. I've just listed some of them. There would be more. In addition to these integrated theaters, there would obviously be functional commands. Those functional commands would relate to training, logistics, I am not in my view, having a functional AD command is probably
Hello, sir.
not advisable.
हाँ सर, बीच में आपका माइक अनम्यूट होके बहुत ज्यादा नॉइज हो रहा था.
Next slide, please. Next slide.
ठीक है.
Next slide.
हॉर्न बज रहा था वो. I think anyway doesn't matter. Right.
Now, the next slide. This one. Okay, just leave it there. Okay, so this is how the top structure actually relates to. This is the table, which is the highest body, Joint Commander Staff Committee, JCSC. You can call it what you want. It's got the CDS, the theater commanders, and it's got the 3 chiefs. You can also have invitees. It will be anchored by the VCDSs, Alpha and Bravo at the headquarter IDS. Now, what I want to say is this structure, which I have just put out, is flexible. I think we have to understand that in this structure, every resource can be controlled centrally, can be allocated as necessary, and it can be reversed whenever it is required. So it is a flexible structure of cooperation and allotment of resources. So the argument that we don't have the resources, and I am afraid that I don't know when we are going to have them, does not stand, because this structure reduces the number of the command structures between the topmost level to the level at which the fighting takes place. And I would presume that as far as the army is concerned, it would be the holding corps which will do the actual fighting. In the case of the Navy, it will be the fleets. In the case of the Air Force, it will have to be organized into operational groups or squadrons, depending upon what they want. They can be located anywhere, but they can also be utilized anywhere. And I think that is the greatest strength of the system. Flexible cooperation in large numbers. And that is the heart of the theater system. And it will also save us a lot of resources, because right now, as General Mukherjee brought out, the fact is that the amount of duplication which exists is something which we need to reduce. Let me end by 2 points. One is, I completely agree with General Mukherjee. Eventually, all our structures depends upon the quality of human capital. Who are the people at the top? Who are the people actually inside that system? How do you select these people? There can't be any doubt about. And that's a big challenge as far as even selecting people for the Department of Military Affairs. I have written an article about it in the IDSA. You need specialized people. You can't probably find it in service. You might have to get it from outside. It's not easily available. The last point I want to make is about the transition. This is a complex transition which has to be carried about at a time of growing geopolitical turbulence. It's not going to be easy. Also, we don't have the money. Therefore, I would think that there is no expertise within the military system or the MOD to plan this transition. Because the planning is, firstly, decide what sort of structure you want. Secondly, plan the transition. And I would think we will have to incorporate both people from government and the military, and also from the corporate sector. The corporate sector has done this transition in a similar model, not of the same size, into what they call strategic business units. It has a similar sort of parallel. So we can actually source it. We must source the talent from anywhere in the country. We must not be worried about the security issues and so on. And lastly, I am of the firm belief that this is a very complex issue. But the government has tossed it into the military's lap that you guys do this. It is a challenge which the military has to meet. And it can only be met by a level of leadership which is really going to be demanding. So all I can wish is the people involved in making this happen the best of luck. There will be a lot of pain more than pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, General Prakash Menon. I think, what is the discussion if there is no dissent? Thank you for that. And I think we all understand what you have done. I think your institution has worked hard, so have you, on this, giving us a particular perspective on this issue. I'll be talking about it a little more later. I will request again, General Roy Chaudhary, are you online, sir? You're not online. May I request Admiral P.K. Chatterjee to come up and present his views. Admiral Chatterjee? Admiral Chatterjee?
Can you see me and hear me?
Yeah, I can hardly see you, but I can hear you. Yeah, now you're getting more clearer.
Is it okay now?
It's okay, but you came under
Fine.
somebody else's name.
No, this is my name too.
Okay,
It's the short form. Coded,
Okay.
you see.
okay,
We are all crying about the GIC.
okay.
First of all, let me wish all of you a good morning, gentlemen. I see no ladies here. I thank Ceners-K for allowing me to air my views on this all-important subject. General Menon has put across a framework which I tend to agree with, but what I would like to do during my talk is to give you some of my personal experiences so that people who are still sitting on the fence, imagining or debating whether there should be theatre commands or not, I would like to sway them to the positive side. Now, going down straight, reforms and restructuring of high defense organizations of India was a long felt requirement and was doing the rounds in the corridors of South Block since 2006. In fact, we had just finished NDC, and almost a decade later, in January 2016, on the last leg of my service, I was fortunate to get an opportunity to meet the then President and the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, late Dr. Pranab Mukherjee, in his chamber. It was during his tenure as a defense minister that the first Joint Defense Doctrine was released in 2006. So seated in front of him, I did put across my misgivings about the half-hearted approach towards the defense reforms in our country. I had then even reflected on China's military reforms, which at that point of time was very contemporary. I couldn't help but narrate how unintegrated our own so-called integrated headquarters Ministry of Defense was, despite the bold inscriptions on all file covers and embellished letterheads. My narrative included how the lower rung of Babus, pardon me for using the word, but it's best understood that way, formed the organizational edifice of the Ministry of Defense by virtue of their relative permanency and were the sole repository of institutional memory for the ever-changing new superior transferred to MOD to invest his intellect and valuable experience in matters defense gathered from his or her previous appointments, which could range from the Ministry of Telecom to animal husbandry. And we would be very, very fortunate as we could see a distinct difference of the bureaucrats who did their second or the third tenure in the Ministry of Defense, their approach and their professionalism. I did reflect on how the intermediate layers of uniformed personnel placed at various levels could do wonders to the decision-making process at the Ministry of Defense while he gave me a patient hearing. I chose to broach these issues because of the disenchantment and the frustrations I personally experienced during my tenures in the Naval Headquarters as a mid-level officer after my submarine and warship commands, and observed that there was little or no change over the years when I went back to the naval headquarters as a vice admiral. Now, as a veteran, I feel elated that a Department of Military Affairs in the Ministry of Defense has been created on the 9th of January this year, manned by service and civilian personnel. Rules, a huge charter of duties. After having headed the Andaman Nicobar Command, I can say with full conviction that formation of ANC was not a mistake, and that an integrated theatre command has a higher potential to get a bang for the buck and is bound to foster jointness. Admittedly, I too harbored some apprehensions about the ANC earlier, as my views, like most of the naysayers, was restricted to my previous experience during a short LTC holiday at Port Blair. From my first-hand experience at ANC and frequent professional interaction with the Strategic Forces Command during my fairly long tenure as the Inspector General Nuclear Safety, I am aware of the huge benefits of jointness from a functional perspective, as I witnessed how professionalism and motivation levels of young officers and men inexplicably rise when they emulate the best practices of the three services, and the colors of olive green, white, blue all emerge to form a productive purple hue. Sadly, it is also my experience that the huge benefits of jointness are hampered and diluted by turf wars among sister services and stubborn mindsets at higher echelons. As for information available in the public domain, the 22nd report of the Standing Committee on Defense says, and I quote, "The Kargil Review Committee has observed that there was a serious lack of synergy among the three services of the armed forces. Apart from that, there was also lack of coordination between the armed forces and civil authorities," unquote. Open sources indicate that the Air Defense Command is the government's top priority, with other geographical commands to follow, including the Peninsular Command, which will encompass the teeth of the Navy. The Indian Air Force has traditionally been responsible for air defense of the country. The Air Defense Command on the anvil, headed by an IF officer, would enable consolidation of all air defense assets available in the country. More importantly, it will facilitate networking of all sensors, weapons, and EW systems held by the three services, which is a complex matter, but a crying need. It is a good move, to my understanding. Delayed acquisition of warfighting equipment is a serious issue. Obviously, there is a latent notion in the North Bloc, and even in the South Bloc for that matter, that budget shortfalls are best addressed by procrastinating capital defense acquisitions on some pretext or the other, as the unspent amount is not carried forward, unlike our unpaid taxes, which also attract penalties. And mere announcements during budget presentations year after year, stating that funds will never be an issue when it comes to the security and defense of the nation, without realizing that the stuff that the services want is not available off the shelf. Buying in desperation, only when trouble is imminent, does not add value in the long run. As the standoff in Ladakh continues, the entire nation is disappointed that only a handful of ordered Rafale fighter jets are operationally available. But when the IF was crying hoarse on the woeful shortage of fighter squadrons for the last 15 years, the people who mattered turned a deaf ear and rather spent more time playing political football, almost on the verge of jeopardizing the acquisition. It is no secret that no air defense equipment was acquired for a period of almost 18 years until the recent acquisitions. Apart from the government's apathy, one major reason which enables the bureaucracy to punch holes in the acquisition cases is divergent requirements and views put upon file excuse me, by individual services, despite HQIDS's effort to eliminate the contradictions. To give you an example, let's take a simple case of purchase of UAVs, which all three services currently have their legitimate requirements for. The formation of an AD command would obviously also promote a more focused and cohesive approach where the differences would easily be resolved at the command level itself before forwarding the respective cases to the government. Further, efforts towards indigenization of aircraft, AD weapons, shore-based, airborne, and shipborne AD sensors would be more focused and even benefit from economy of scales. The AD command would be better poised to prioritize distribution of assets to geographical theater commands depending on their threat perceptions. It goes without saying that the AD command would have to adequately be cross-staffed with requisite specialists from relevant disciplines from sister services, and of course, inter-services, inter-command consultations would also exist. As far as training institutions are concerned, I am of the view that status quo should be maintained. There is no substitute for parent service training. For example, naval pilots should continue to train with the IF till they are upgraded for deck operations. Or let's say, test pilots training of naval pilots must continue to rest with the IF as hitherto. I do not expect or proclaim that formation of theater commands would be a magic wand providing immediate solutions to all the woes of the armed forces. There are complexities involved in the area of interface and communication protocols, but I'm certain that with the passage of time and by absorbing a series of iterative changes, theater commands would be highly beneficial to our nation, as it would also allow an innovative commander to combine and employ joint capabilities across a wide spectrum of operations, minimizing delays. Meeting individual aspirations and career growth profiles of serving personnel as well as rank structure is an important issue and would inevitably undergo appropriate changes. And I could dwell on it during the QA, but I think General Menon has given a good framework where 3 stars, current 3 stars would get uplifted to 4 stars when it comes to theater commands based on the size of the assets they command and the responsibilities they hold. Having the ANC and the SFC functioning for a number of years, many of the ground rules of administrative nature have already been established, be it ownership of land for creation of infrastructure, budget, discipline, powers of punishment, appraisal and reporting chains, and so on and so forth, are now set for future integrated theater commands to implement. The Standing Committee of Defense in 2008-2009's 36th report reiterated that Andaman and Nicobar Command and Strategic Forces Command was set up as India's first tri-service integrated commands to exemplify the concepts of integration and jointness to other tri-service commands. This suggests that the political direction was clear, irrespective of the slow implementation. And I dare say that ambivalent response of the 3 services to an extent that stymied the process is responsible. It would also mean that the service chiefs would have to relinquish their operational hat and be content with only their staff hat, as aptly brought out by Admiral Arun Prakash, who needs no introduction, in his book titled India's Higher Defense Organization. And I quote, "In India, the service chiefs since independence continue to wear 2 hats, a staff hat and an operational hat as a commander-in-chief of his force. This is an anachronism, and all modern military organizations, the operational fighting responsibilities are delegated to designated theater commanders, while the service chiefs are responsible for recruitment, training, logistics of the armed forces. This issue was not addressed by the GOM, but is linked very closely to the CDS format. One would like to emphasize the fact that since no chief would like to preside over his own divestment, it is unrealistic to expect a favorable recommendation for the CDS system from these services, unquote. The real issue is whether the present military structure is ideal for the services to coordinate and effectively mount joint operations with the least possible reaction time. From my humble experience of being in charge of naval operations for little more than 2 years at the naval headquarters, the answer is a big no. If one were to take a cue from the long lead time of planning, even for forecasted joint exercises, the number of meetings, the content of discussions, and the level of satisfaction at the end of the exercise, I am certain that much of the chaff would be blown off in a puff once all the participants providing assets or manpower were accountable to the same boss. The new organizations have to be tailored based on detailed studies, protracted discussion, and analysis to suit our threat perceptions, which I'm sure is going to be the case. A joint theater command would be more responsive, even in a hybrid situation. Let alone China, even Russia as late as 2010 changed over to joint strategic commands. If my memory serves me right, there are more than 55 nations which have joint command structure in place. Major powers which have power projection capabilities have joint operational commands, which could be either functional or a combination of theater and regional commands. Even powers which are territorial defense-centric have regional joint operational command. It is said that the United States benefited from the joint authority vested on the combatant commanders. After the Cold War, operations like Panama, that is Operation Just Cause, Iraq, Desert Storm, and Bosnia, Deliberate Force, stand in contrast to the difficulties and inter-service squabbling of Grenada and Lebanon. There are several factors which led to a victory in the liberation of Bangladesh, which does not necessarily mean that the current structure is best suited for our forces. In this context, I am also reminded of the fact that in the 1965 war with Pakistan, the IF chief was out of the loop and not in the know until well into the war, let alone joint planning. This fact does not speak much of our current system. But we still won the war, didn't we? Thank you, gentlemen, for this patient listening.
Thank you, PK. It's been a learning experience of what you talked about. May I now request the next speaker, and once again, General Shankar Roy Chaudhary, sir, are you online? General Shankar Roy Chaudhary, sir? Well, I think he's still not been able to manage to get onto line. Army Commander Bakshi, Praveen Bakshi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. I can see you. Praveen, it's your turn now. I think you are best suited for this particular job.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you to all the panelists and for honoring me with giving me the space to join in today. I can't help but notice that I'm inevitably the baby of the group. Even today, I'm the youngest, I think, who's on the group. But it gives me a sort of comfort that I can be a bit impetuous and get away with it. So I'm going to give some wild ideas, which may or may not resonate with your individual thinking styles, but there it is. First and foremost, I find it paradoxical that 20 years on from the Kargil war, after clamoring for jointness and CDS and what have you, theater commands, when it has been granted to us on a plate by the political dispensation, we are now quibbling and arguing and reinventing the wheel. I mean, when we look at strategic cultures, and I'm talking about the military ex-servicemen and perhaps the serving people, they are divided on this issue. I'll go a step further. A wee bit of historical background, just about 4 or 5 years, not much. The current political dispensation from day one was oriented towards establishing a CDS and theater commands, is my personal opinion. Born out of interactions with all the combined commanders, as also a one-on-one interaction with the current Prime Minister. I was convinced. In fact, if anything, I'll stick my neck out and say he was going to announce it in January 17. But seeing the reaction and the diversity of that reaction from the CNCs, he held back. But thereafter, when he came back with a resounding majority, he pushed it through. It was bound to happen. So the reality is the CDS is there and he's been chartered to move ahead. Why did he do it? In my mind, some would say it's economical, some would say operational effectiveness. Now, I leave it to your judgment. How much would he really be able to educate on operational efficiencies of jointness, apart from normal common sense? But economical, yes, it sure is. So I leave it to you, how you take it, why he went in for it. But he was sure it's a good thing for the nation. Now, what were we seeing till then? Over the years, I have seen, whenever confronted with a challenge at the national level, our strategic options were diminishing, were constricting. Despite the lakhs of crores we were spending, world's second or third largest arms importer, but whenever we were confronted with a challenge, we were left with very few strategic options. So what went wrong? Did we get the challenge wrong? Did we get our capability development wrong? Or we got both wrong? I would tend to agree with the third part. We got both wrong. And why? Because we were never on the same page. All this talk of jointness and what's wrong stood us well by all the wars we have fought. It has never come to the surface how things could have been better if jointness was truly affected. It has never come to the forefront amount of lives we've lost. I think Admiral Chatterjee just mentioned the fact about IAF not participating in one of the major wars. Look at the kind of lives we lost and the national humiliation. So I do not lay much store by such arguments. Now, before I go further, I think all of us who would like to opine on such matters of jointness and all, it would be instructive to read a document which is now almost 4 years old, which was given to me by Major General Roy, and I thank you once again, sir. I've thanked you in every forum, was on the Congressional Report of 2016 on the Nicholas Goldwater Act of 1986. And I'm amazed at the number of people who've never come across this document. It's openly available. He gave it to me. I remember, sir, you gave it to me in 2016 itself. It very clearly analyzes what the Americans, why did they go in for jointness? What did they achieve in 30 years? What did they not achieve in 30 years? Where do they want to go ahead? Very systematically done. Unfortunately, we are bereft of such political military education in our country. I don't think our parliamentarians will produce such a document unless there is a subcommittee. So in the absence of that, I think our think tanks will have to step in, but must go through this report. Now, coming on to the import of the decision. CDS, wearing two hats, also Secretary DMA. As Secretary DMA, and I underscore this point, he has been chartered, not as CDS, as Secretary DMA, he's been chartered to establish or give a architecture for theater commands. and a time limit of 3 years has been set. And in these 3 years, it has been stated that the chiefs will retain their operational control over their respective services. It does not say whether they will continue to retain or they will not continue to retain. It all depends on how the CDS formulates the paper on the theatre commands and sends it up to the government and how they approve it. So that's an open-ended question for the time being. Apart from that, there are no other restrictions placed on the CDS to the best of my knowledge in articulating how the whole architecture should come about. However, capital procurements and policy has been retained with the Defense Secretary and not with the Secretary DMA or the CDS. I'd like to address this question, which is a misnomer about Defense Secretary being responsible for the defense of the nation. I questioned a recently retired Defense Secretary upfront, asked him, this was one of your charter. How did you take it? He laughed. He said, do you see me being responsible for the defense of the nation? I don't understand a damn about it. I said, then why is it there? He said, the answer is very simple. After independence, the three services were kept out of the government deliberately, and it had to come. The Prime Minister won't take it on. The Defense Minister didn't want to take it on. MOD had those departments, and I was the senior most Department of Defense, so it came on to me. That's it. I said, how did you role play it? He said, I never role played it. Now, that's a very telling statement, whether in jest or otherwise. Most of us tend to believe it is otherwise and not in jest, because we know his involvement in as far as responsible for the defense of the nation. I shall leave that for another time. Now, coming on to the approach, CDS being a reality, he's going to flesh it out. He has chosen to start with a low-hanging fruit, in his own words, perhaps with the AD command. And that he thought will go through as like a jiffy and will ease the way for establishment of integrated theatre commands. To my personal mind, it couldn't have been a bigger disaster. Look at where we are with the AD commands today. By the way, the clock is ticking. He's got 3 years. We are almost coming to the end of the first year. And what do we have for it? We are still squabbling. Air Force is claiming that it was always under us, will remain under us, and perhaps they are right. What is the AD command? It's nothing to do with the theatre. It's not an AD theatre command. It's an AD command. The difference is stark. So what should be the approach? I have heard on various forums, and incidentally, this webinar is being held, must be the umpteenth webinar on the same subject. Most people tend to get on to the issue of the theatre commands immediately. How should they be? How many should they be? What rank should be the 3-star, 4-star? They are missing the whole thing. I think, but somebody here said it, the thing to tackle is, if and when the theatre commands come in, who will they report to? By that I mean, what is our higher defense organization? I think General Mukherjee very rightly pointed this out, the dysfunctional manner in which the higher defense organization is currently functioning. Now, that's the moot point. Who will the theatre commanders report to? If they report to the CDS, it's simple, fine, he's there, and CDS, then what are the service chiefs doing? But there is a lot of naysayers for it, especially from the other services. And I would like to mention that. They feel too much of power cannot be concentrated in one person's hand. In fact, there are some politicians who are also opining on the same. They couldn't be bothered with the military niceties. They said too much power cannot be concentrated on in one person's hands. So what are the alternatives? Let's see. Theatre commanders report directly to the RM. Let's be pragmatic. Do you think he can take on any meaningful decisions from them? Periodic meetings, timely meetings is okay. But theatre commanders would require, those of us who've been out there in the commands would know, there are myriad issues which staff continues to work on, which impinge on capability development, future projections as also training. I don't think the theater commanders can be reporting directly to the RM. So the next best question somebody said is, let him have a defense council in which the theater commanders, the 3 service chiefs, and the CDS also comes in. Essentially, this argument was premised on the fact not to give it to the CDS. So diffuse it further. I don't think in our country, collective decision-making has stood us well. I should know, even from my personal experience in the fag end of my service in Doklam, I know how what came to me, what decision was taken, and what decision was not taken. I'll leave it at that. But I don't think collective decision-making will really give us, and especially in a fast-moving, different hues of conventional warfare, which we are getting subjected to now, which may be localized, sectoral, and displaced spatially. So I don't think a collective council, and how often will they get together? And what will they be doing sitting here when some of them are required to be in the National Command Authority? So I tend to agree with the theory that the operational command has to come down to the CDS. I would clearly articulate that. I should have stated my position right in the beginning. I'm all for jointness, I'm all for theater commands, and I'm all for the CDS to have operational command. Having said that, I would like to caveat it with certain safeguards. One, he cannot wear the hat of a secretary DMA as a CDS with operational authority. The secretary DMA has to be a VCDS, a CMC equivalent officer. Why does the CDS have to be there? Perhaps people are reading too much into what the government did, and perhaps they are right. But to my mind, they've just found an interim measure for the first 3 years. So it's not mandatory that a CDS with operational command will also be a secretary DMA. The two are completely different. And from what media reports one is reading, the CDS is so weighed down with files, he has no time or will have no time to exert operational control. An operational commander has to be bereft of all this baggage, which goes on with policies and bureaucratic issues. So that's one. Second.
Praveen, just a second. Arun, Jan Shankar Roy Chaudhary is trying to come online. Let him in. Let in Janu Shankar Roy Chaudhary.
Okay.
Let him join.
Okay, sir. अभी जन शंकर रॉय चौधरी आने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं. Let us join.
All yours, Praveen.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Second issue is the number of theaters. Oh, that can be anyone's guess. I'm okay with it, open to it. To my mind, there should be not more than 4 theaters, but in a different format from what was spoken earlier. You require a theater looking after China, threat, come geographical based. Another theater looking after Pakistan. One theater, I repeat, one theater looking after the maritime domain. And you require a centralized theater. You can call it a strategic reserve theater, which houses all the other instruments which assist, which are enablers in our war fighting, including strategic reserves. For example, if you are retaining the Mountain Strike Corps, it goes there, the strategic lift capability of the Air Force, your strategic capability with the Navy, such like things, your cyber, space, AD, all that can come in and be housed in this little theater. So to my mind, there should be 4 theaters, not more. Rank structure, I couldn't be too bothered about it. You can weight how important a theater commander is vis-a-vis a service chief. Now here comes the outlandish part of what I wanted to say, which has not found favor with anybody. I think the biggest problem today is who's going to take ownership for this concept which the Prime Minister has laid out. Because when he spelled it out, he was fully aware service chiefs didn't want it. They wanted a half measure, permanent chairman chiefs of staff, a glorified chairman chief of staff. The bureaucrats didn't want it at all. The NSA didn't want it. Only he wanted it. Now, we can guess what will happen if people are not going to take ownership of this concept and move it ahead. It will get derailed. So the outlandish part, to my mind, was once they come about in the 3 years' time, not today, in 2023, move the 3 service chiefs as theater commanders of the 3 important theaters. Outlandish it may seem. All of them are well versed with jointness, sitting at the apex level. They will take ownership of that concept. The only person who will lose the maximum in this concept would be the army chief. The Air Force and the naval chiefs would gain exponentially in terms of command, but the army chief would lose a whole lot. And further, I was arguing with some bureaucrats when they said, this book which has come out, Army and the Nation by Steve Wilkinson, he has brought out the specter of a coup again, which the bureaucrats love to thrive on. So I was arguing with them. They said, CDS. I said, no. The moment you have theater commanders, the specter of a coup goes down tremendously. There is no army chief with 1.2 million army under him now. There would be theater commanders with 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 lakhs, depending which theater you're commanding. And they are of all 3 services fully integrated. Where is the specter of a coup from the army going to rise? But anyway, I had digressed. Further, I think there are certain imperatives which need to be borne in mind. And the first one is minimum turbulence when you implement the idea. You cannot strategically imbalance yourself where you say, we'll establish theater commanders, we'll remove the CNCs, we'll do this to the course. Oh, I'm afraid that kind of turmoil with these 2 predatory adversaries of ours sitting who are not going to be wished away would take advantage of straight away. So to my mind, minimum turbulence should be address the higher defense organization first, establish your theater commanders, pare down some commands which are required, put the theater commands in the area where a command headquarter was existing initially, because all the communication and infrastructure which is likely to be there, keep the CNCs intact the way they are. And as you move along, and from 2023 timelines, to my mind, it will take 7 years to really refine this whole thing. So till 2030, there's enough time. Thereafter, you decide which CNCs to further pare down, which corps to pare down, and how to merge commands of both the services, Army and Air Force and Navy, and move ahead. But if we try, some people have also said, oh, we should go in for an incremental mode, which is establish one theater first. I shudder to think. You establish one theater under the CDS, and the rest of India is commanded by the 3 service chiefs. Can we be even more, how should I put it, foolish about such a thing? How can you have this? And these are all concepts which I've picked up from various webinars. Establish one theater first. So that will be commanded now. That one theater, I leave it to your judgment. Word about how will this theaters look like? Let's say the China theater. Gentlemen, I would shudder to be in the shoes of GOC 14 Corps today. I don't know which side is he looking at. Is he looking at Eastern Ladakh, or is he looking at Kargil and Dras? Why was our structures put a man in such a position? Because of our faulty structures, where we never saw the threat build up, which it has built up today. So to my mind, 14 Corps needs to come into the Northern Theater or Northeastern Theater, whatever name you give it, it doesn't bother. Semantics are not important. It must clearly be China specific. And to my mind, in a China specific theater, the Air Force has to ramp up its capabilities against China. A little bean count, and it is no secret, no official paper required. Look at the amount of forces arrayed against Pakistan today, and look at the amount of forces of the army arrayed against China. And where is our threat? There is a complete mismatch. A rebalance from the west to the north is a crying strategic imperative, which I'm afraid is really not finding traction and necessity. There's no catalyst for it. There is only talk about it. It should have been done long back. What is the situation in Eastern Ladakh, to take it as an example today? Complete 14 Corps, less 8 division, but look at the amount of divisions which have gone in there. The complete reserves of Northern Command are already there, looking after China, because we got our challenge from there wrong. And today we have, of course, the army's done exceedingly well. current leadership has done exceedingly well. We've mirrored it. But why did we come to this pass? Because of our faulty structures. We never recognized this threat. And look at the kind of threat which has come up. Having commanded Eastern Army, I can tell you, Eastern Army has a surfeit of boots on ground. Adequacy is the word. But Eastern Ladakh was always crying. Imagine one division plus 2 odd brigades, a raid against a potential threat of 7 to 8 divisions of the DSFs of the adversary. And that's exactly what's happened today. Up front, maybe 2 or 3, look at the rear. So that's one aspect which I feel we should be very clear about, one front to one theater. Another important imperative, and I'm going to sign off now very shortly, is training of staff. From the day the Prime Minister announced it, we should have started our staff training at least. But we are still waiting. 1 year has gone by. I don't see cross-pollination. If anything, some commands have done cross-pollination on their own initiatives. It is not top-driven. And you require cross-pollination. You require service officers in each other's headquarters. What are we waiting for? I haven't understood. And we had a springboard with the IDS with us. And there are a number of officers who've gone through the portals of IDS. Why are we not leveraging their experience? It defies logic as far as I'm concerned. I think because once you announce the theater command, then to start training of staff and all, I'm afraid is going to have a huge, huge problem. Theater command headquarters should be on existing command headquarters. Another important part is we should not tinker with our strategic structure at all in the beginning. This is part of the minimum turbulence. The National Command Authority and the way it's structured should be left the way it is. Because if you try and do that along with the theater, I'm again afraid it will be a mismatch. And lastly, we need to, in the future, align our HR policies of the 3 services. If you're going to have tri-service organizations, the current mismatch which exists between the 3 services, especially in senior ranks, needs to be addressed, and the impact of it softened in the years to come as we move along. I'll leave it here and would be open to question and answers. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Army Commander Praveen Bakshi. That was very candid of you to speak on these issues. And I think it's a wonderful talk that you gave. General Shankar Roy Chaudhary, sir, are you online now, sir? Can you hear me, sir? Well, I don't think he can still hear me. Air Chief Marshal Arup Raha? Air Chief Marshal Arup Raha. Can I request you to start your talk?
Right. Am I visible? Okay. Right. My warm greetings of the day to all the eminent speakers who have already spoken ahead of me and the distinguished participants in this webinar. Had defense organization of most powerful nations have evolved over a period of time. HDO obviously includes appropriate structures for political control over the military, bureaucratic oversight in fund management, acquisition of weapon systems, equipment for capability enhancement, creation of infrastructure, etc. And of course, organizational structure of the armed forces individually and combinedly to deliver on the military objectives determined by the nation. This is where the allocation of business and transaction of business rules of the Government of India come into play for efficient functioning of the top echelons of political leadership, bureaucracy, and military leadership. Well, I'm all for changes and reformation that is essential to make the services achieve the objectives, the nation achieve the objectives. But it is not possible to copy and paste, the template of the US, European nations, powerful military nations, or China for India's higher defense organization, because the structure of the HDO is governed by the constitutional framework, the national aspirations, threat perceptions, and its mitigation. These factors cannot be the same for all nations. The US has global commitments, its militaries have expeditionary roles, but they have immense resources to meet their aspirations to have a global strategic footprint. China, on the other hand, is a rising superpower and is building up its military and economic capabilities to challenge the American hegemony. So these two nations, their HDOs have undergone reforms and restructuring in the recent times, especially that of China, to meet their global commitments in terms of power projection. India is not in the same league.
Just
We
a
have no
second. Arun, he is online. So after the Air Chief Marshal, please bring on Shankar Roy Chaudhary, General Shankar Roy Chaudhary.
Right, sir.
Sorry
It has
for
no
it.
okay, sir. It has no territorial ambitions or expeditionary commitments as of now. But India has to protect its legitimate strategic interests in the region and secure its territorial integrity against two collusive nuclear power adversaries. We do not have the economic heft, nor do we have the resources, except perhaps human resources, to be a global power as of now. Therefore, the question is what sort of higher defense organization India should have. I do not find many shortcomings in national security architecture, which has been discussed already. However, the gap between the purpose and the practice in the functioning of the near perfect instruments of national power is remarkable. The gap is remarkable. Like a constitution, it is the most ideal constitution, but what sort of governance are you getting in this country? India has tiered decision-making institutions, CCS, MOD, under the RM or the RRM, with elements like DRDO, scientific advisor, FADS, and other secretaries. We have the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Defense with MPs from various parties for oversight on defense matters. Then we have the Defense Planning Committee under the NSA. Ideally, it should be under the Raksha Mantri, to my mind. Defense Acquisition Council, etc. And now we have the CDS and the Department of Military Affairs, DMA, besides the three service chiefs. India has several policy documents, policy directives for smooth functioning of the higher defense organization. Important ones, which has been discussed, and I'll highlight again, is the NSS, which is actually nebulous, not documented. Military strategy is the RM's OP directive, which should be culled out from the NSS. The National War Book, Allocation of Business and Transaction of Business Rules, Defense Acquisition Policy, military doctrines. We have most of them, but all of them require updation regularly. So it is evident that we have excellent structures, institutions, policies, directives, and of course the mechanisms to deliver on national security objectives. So what ails the HDO which needs fixing? Most of the points have already been discussed by the previous speakers. But to my mind, I would like to highlight a few. Firstly, non-availability of NSS, National Security Strategy, is a very huge handicap because it's like a Bible, it's like the constitution for decision makers at higher levels to refer to it, be it political leadership, be it bureaucracy or military leadership. Second is military strategy or the RMSOP directive. Do you know it is not regularly upgraded or updated with all the information that is required? It takes years. It lags behind by almost the equal amount of time of the periodicity that is there. So that is the type of importance our political authorities and bureaucracy gives to military strategy. And this military strategy is very important because our planning for mitigation of evolving threats is based on this very document. That gets jeopardized if it is not upgraded. And the LTIPP is also based on this important document. Third is the lack of professional knowledge, expertise, exposure in leadership hierarchy, be it political leadership in tier 1, the bureaucracy in tier 2, and of course, military leadership in tier 3. Political leadership and the bureaucracy lack adequate perception about national security aspects, unlike in the US or some other nations. And they have very little knowledge about the military aspects, as was highlighted by one of the speakers about what the defense secretary told him. And it's true. Similarly, military leaders are not so knowledgeable about the functioning of the government, the fiscal policies, and financial aspects, including acquisition. The fourth point is mistrust of the military, as was brought out right from the beginning. Beginning since we became independent, there has been a perception of mistrust by the political leadership and bureaucracy towards the military. It has undermined the relationship at the highest levels. Functioning of the MOD is non-transparent. A case in point are the shadow files, which have existence in the MOD. These are on the cases that the service headquarters are projected to the MOD, but the service headquarters officers cannot access it. So that is a kind of, shadow files and secrecy they observe. The salience of bureaucratic advice over military advice in matters military is very evident in MOD decisions. I think the DMA should be able to overcome this challenge now. Fifthly, higher directions of the political authorities are often delayed, inadequate on important issues. Ad hocism tends to be the only constant. Once again, CDS, DMA combination may be able to iron it out. Is jointness among the three services a real issue? I know a lot of people have spoken a lot of things. I have a different perspective, but it's my point of view. To my mind, jointness among the three services is not the real issue, especially after the establishment of the chairman, chiefs of staff committee and headquarters IDS a few years back or 10, 12 years back. So what was the flaw? The flaw was once again ad hocism. Dual hatting of the chairman's COSC, the office I have held for 2.5 years, perhaps a record. I have too many stories to tell, but I don't want to say that in this open forum. But so as a result, the chairman's COSC not being permanent, not having the authorities, was a lame duck chairman. It would work beautifully. All those issues that most of the people have brought out would have been resolved, and then ITC, etc., could have been thought about slightly later, to my mind. So there are tough battles, as was highlighted, common to all the armed forces in the world. Nowhere, it is prevalent everywhere, and such battles can be minimized to harmless levels by appointing a CDS, which has been done in many countries and who enjoys a lot of authority in decision making over the chiefs when they disagree. So service chiefs are often influenced by hardliners in their own service, playing to the galleries, jointness becoming the actual victim of inflexibility, selfishness, and egos, which Admiral Pradeep Chatterjee had highlighted. It's true because we work together and we know the problems. This will get addressed with the CDS now. The real issue to my mind is non-availability of the wherewithal, which has been highlighted. We do not have adequate resources in terms of funds, assets, equipment, weapon platforms for capability building to mitigate the external threats that we are exposed to. Once again, ad hocism rules the roost in budgetary support. The prioritized long-time integrated perspective plan of the three services is cleared by the MOD and the Raksha Mantri and is normally worked out on an assured year-on-year increase in budgetary allocation by about 10% for the capital budget and about 6% for revenue expenditures. But these plans are never adhered to, never adhered to. We have very long gestation period of acquisition cases and non-release of funds by the MOF, Minister of Finance, for various procrastination and the reasons they have. The result is that we have 36 Rafales when we require 126, despite more than 10 years of protracted negotiation. It is true for all the acquisition cases, be it the Army or the Navy or the Air Force. And because these are process driven and not outcome driven. And there is no one to be held accountable, as was highlighted by General Mukherjee. The armed forces are actually being accused of lacking in jointness. Most of us have started believing it because the actual problems are being hidden. The failings of the authorities who matter, the political and bureaucracy leadership. We have actually swallowed the bait. Not that there are no problems with the armed forces, but those can be resolved. Like I mentioned, if you have a powerful CDS, if you have a powerful chairman COSC, in the past, you could have resolved these issues. Okay, that's besides the point. So now you see that a lot of emergency purchases are being made because we are in great trouble, faced with a grave situation in Leh Ladakh sector. This is what happens every time. We resort to emergency purchases. Yes, certain amount you will have to purchase. But when you have, you're lacking in capability in tremendous measure, you resort to such activity. So what has happened to the LTIPP? Why no questions are being asked? Why no one to blame? Why the media is not asking questions? But we take it on ourselves that we don't have jointness, which is not true. Okay, I'll tell you why. Take the example of Bangladesh, liberation war. As far as jointness is concerned, that is an excellent template of jointness in military training, planning, training, execution of operations, which gave India an outstanding victory in military history. The CDS and headquarters IDS, to my mind, would do well to study the 1970 on-ops, to identify the aspects which contributed to synergistic operations and adopt it in the current model of jointness. Let us not make revolutionary changes. India doesn't believe in revolution because our people are made like that. In our organizational structure, based on the success of some measures in some other militaries. Let us not fall into a trap. It would amount to trying to fix the system that ain't broken. The remedy may prove to be worse than the disease. I think it will be best that the reforms are progressive. A step-by-step approach to change is desirable. You put timelines, I think we'll make a hash of it. The institution of the DMA, along with the CDS, is a very, very positive step, highly desirable step in reforming the higher defense organization as far as I think the armed forces are concerned. But what about the others? There are many other important elements, political leadership, bureaucracy. What about them? So I think there are 11 tasks which the CDA and the DMA should complete in the immediate term. And I know these tasks are already, they're working at it. And thereafter, I'll talk about the ITC, Integrated Theater Command, and of course, the Air Defense Command. First of all, creation of a more lean and mean force by enhancing teeth to tail ratio, which is already started. Second, elimination of existing redundancies, duplication of assets, infrastructure, and manpower. How will you do that? Set up joint functional commands first for training, for maintenance and logistics, etc. And build up the space and cyber commands urgently. This has been there for quite some time. And I know people in various important positions in the political domain and the bureaucracy, they do not want it. They think it is an expansion of the army's armed forces requirements, having more 3-star and 2-star officers. So this is the future of warfare. What is the importance the government, the nation, and we are giving to building these tri-services joint operational command, the silent warfare commands, which is the future warfare? Then emphasize and implement tri-services communication network for administration and operations. It is so essential for network-centric warfare. That is the future. This capability, the armed forces have been working on for quite some time. And a lot of progress has been made. And I think the CDS has to push it further so that it is totally integrated for network-centric warfare capability. Enhance jointness in every other sphere, like military, all the military endeavors in terms of intelligence, acquisition process, budgetary management, HIDR, etc., which are already under the headquarter IDS, that is under the COSC. That means it is under the CDS now, and I'm sure these will get enhanced. Most important, as people have been speaking about it, formulation and implementation of a very effective human resource policies. That is the first thing. You require in-service training, postings and exposure so that people are fit to tenant appointments in joint organizations. I loved when I had to interact with, Pradeep's command, ANC, SFC, and headquarters IDS. And the people there, doesn't matter what uniform they wore, they would swear by jointness. But it was not so in air headquarters. It was not so in the army headquarters. It was not so in naval headquarters. They're totally belligerent. Right. Next is insist on the formulation of the NSS. It's a very important document. That's the Bible I will refer to whenever I make a decision. Is it in line with that or not? Update the military strategy, military doctrines of all the three services, and joint doctrine, and reprioritize the LTIPP based on the threat perception as enumerated in the military strategy and the year-on-year escalation commitment, of the government. Seek updation of AOB, TOB rules, the Union War Book. As it was brought out, Defense Secretary doesn't feel that he is responsible for the defense of India, though all these books say so. So it just ignores and defies the reality. Let's call a spade a spade. Let the CTS be in charge. Let him look after the defense of the country. And because the political leadership is there, he is not on his own. Now, the biggest task to my mind would be, and which would pay rich dividends, is integration of operational plans of the three services at the service headquarters level. It should be fused joint plans. Currently, such plans are very limited. There are only few warfighting contingencies that is catered for in headquarters IDS, where all the three services have jointly agreed to, formulate certain fused plans. But we require it for every important contingency, warfighting contingency. So that is one thing that the CDS should be able to do. Also, it should ensure that there are fused plans at the command headquarters level for all the three services. Currently, it is always bilateral. That means between the Army and the Navy, Army and the Air Force and the Navy, and things like that. It has to be tri-services, joint fused, operational plans for all warfighting contingencies. And the CDS should play a very important role, even if it doesn't have command control, but he will have the advisory role. He will monitor them and report to the RM about the feasibility of such plans, and then there will be some corrections. Now, the 11th task I must mention now, before we go into ITC, is that let us reduce the number of operational commands. The Indian Army had split the Western Command into Northern Command, Western Command, Southwestern Command. The Air Force created Southwestern Command in addition to Western Command and Southern Command. So in hindsight, when you look at these creations of commands and splitting up commands, we think it was not desirable. Well, in hindsight, I am a visionary, so are many. I would recommend that we create 4 geographical regions or divisions in line with, General Prakashman and, Praveen, who was mentioning this. One has to be China-centric. You could call it North or Northeastern. One would be the, Pakistan-centric, could be Western region. One would be hinterland-centric, that is Peninsular region. And third would be, or the fourth would be, the most important to my mind, Indian Ocean region, Indian Ocean Command. And how will you organize them? I'm not saying they have to be integrated under one person. It will be individual commands of the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. Western region would have 3 commands, one each from the Army, Navy, Air Force. Eastern region would have 3 commands, Army, Navy, Air Force. Peninsular Command would have Army, Air Force, and Naval commands already there. They'll have to integrate in terms of coordination. And Indian Ocean region would be an expanded form of ANC. That is where our interest will lie in the future if we were to take on China besides the northern borders. So this is how I look at things. Of course, this is my perception, but obviously changes would be welcome. Tinkering would be necessary. But once we complete this 11 tasks, which the CDS and DMA are already working at it, I'm sure, a lot of dust will settle down and we'll be able to see how these changes have been implemented, whether it's bearing fruits or not, are there any problems that needs to be ironed out? And once the dust settles, then we can think of the ITC. Though government is giving 3 years, but I think it will take much more than that. Okay. So in terms of responsibilities, I'd say the CDS maintains command and control of all tri-services joint commands. He has to be entrusted with the responsibility of overseeing all fuse plans, operation plans for all wartime contingencies at the service headquarters level as well as operational command level. He has to attend all the war games and all the joint exercises at the armed forces headquarters level and at the command level. Service chiefs, to my mind, as of now, they could retain command and control and staff functions till the time further changes are thought of. And in terms of ITC and AD command, there are some issues which needs to be resolved in case you want to implement either a defense command or the integrated theater command. The issues that is in terms of area, in terms of assets, in terms of conceptual differences in how you operate. I will not elaborate now. I can answer them in the question answer session. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, higher defense organizational reforms are not only meant for the 3 services. It is meant equally toward the integration of the political, bureaucratic leadership, and of course the military leadership. I think what we need to do is formal exposure to our politicians, and training to the politicians who tenant important positions in this higher defense organization, and of course the bureaucrats. Some ad hoc measures have been taken, like some of the bureaucrats attend the NDC and DSSC, CDM, but they are much better prepared people to take on aspects of higher defense organization in the bureaucracy. Synergy is going to be a big problem because there are too many agencies, but it is not a problem if it is driven from the top and quality time is made available to discuss and take decisions. Jointness will improve 100%, if not more, with the CDS and the DMA implementing the 11 tasks I've talked about, and I think it is already being planned or being thought of, and we iron out the problem areas while implementing those tasks. Integrated theater command, okay, I'm not against it, but let's consider all the factors properly before we jump into it, before we make the base, before we make the foundation right. So I would say let's make haste slowly. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, Air Chief Marshal Arup Raha. I noticed our former Chief, General Shankar Roy Chaudhary, online. Sir, can you give your talk now? Please unmute your mic before giving the talk. Only your mic, sir, nothing else. So you have not unmuted your mic as yet, sir. So please unmute your mic. Yes, you're okay now. You're okay now,
I'm
sir.
okay now. All right.
Yes.
All right. So I had to spend a lot of time because I perhaps couldn't get this the correct positioning right, how to mute and unmute. But now I think I've done it. So we are actually discussing the restructured MOD integrated headquarters. Now, this is an issue which has been with all 3 services, I think ever since we joined the armed forces and came out of it. Actually, when we joined the armed forces, if you take a look at it, the National Defense Academy and the Joint Services Wing were set up at that time so that if the cadets, young cadets who were there, they grow up together. And this is precisely the aim was that when we go into service, the services would grow up with a cadre. Services would grow up with a cadre of officers who are already professionally, socially familiar with each other. But in spite of that, the biggest obstacles to integrated in-service functioning has been the services themselves. And an important aspect which I think we are not covering today, but which actually are the paramilitary forces. The paramilitary forces are taking on a huge amount of what we used to call security problems. And that also is correct because the paramilitary forces were organized so that the regular forces would not be called out so often. And in the day-to-day working of the socio-political scenario in the country, it is the paramilitary forces which are doing the lion's share of the work. So it may not be a matter of surprise if the paramilitary forces say, okay, we want our share of the organizational pie too. And we have to factor that into our aspirational goals in the armed forces. That is something we have to, I'm not going further into that, but this is an issue which we have to seriously consider. Restructured MOD. We have been discussing that right from the beginning. There's only one way to restructure the Ministry of Defense. That is to have defense officers posted integral to the Ministry of Defense, because we've had half-hearted organizations of posting a colonel or posting a brigadier or not brigadier, my God, no. Posting the odd colonel somewhere or the odd even major. But we find that the armed forces will never be integrated in the manner integration demands unless the Ministry of Defense itself is integrated. That means we should follow other countries, as we were saying, because it is certainly not there in our country, where the joint services or the integrated Ministry of Defense answers to the highest authority in the land. It differs from country to country. Somewhere it is the president, somewhere it is the prime minister, varies from country to country. But seriously, they don't see anything wrong in integrated headquarters with armed forces working side by side with the civil services. We somehow seem to have a taboo about it. And the civil services also have seen our weakness. They said, we don't want these guys. All posts of, say, joint secretary upwards have to be tenured by the civil services. I've never seen, I don't think any of you have, an officer of the rank of Major General upwards, Major General, Rear Admiral, Air Vice Marshal upwards, working in the Ministry of Defense as a functional part of the organization there. At times, we should have to, like they do in other services, when that army officer, naval officer, air force officer is posted in the Ministry of Defense, the last thing that the people in the defense headquarters, the defense ministry want to be reminded is about the presence of a uniform on the premises. We should go in civil clothes. We should go in civil clothes. And that has also been tied in a very small way. And where it has been tried, the army has got civilianized. The army, navy, and air force, those who have been working in these appointments, particularly places like the DRDO, They have become civilized, and I don't mean that in a good sense. We've lost our sense of values. Those people have lost their sense of dedication. And so it's a very, really speaking, it's an intellectual come cultural issue, which is very difficult to specify and very difficult to overcome. So yes, we should have an integrated headquarters. We should have a Ministry of Defense. Let's not call them integrated. Let us assume that when you say integrated, say Ministry of Defense, we should have in the Ministry of Defense on their working strength officers from the armed forces who should be, without their outer symbolism of the uniform, they should be working in the defense in a properly functional appointment. That we have got to bring about. The one thing I've always been curious about is, suppose we do have a Chief of Defense Staff, in the sense we are talking about it, what will be his relationship with the National Security Advisor? What is his relationship with the National Security Advisor? The National Security Advisor controls his secretariat is the National Security Advisory Board. What will be the relationship of the Chief of Defense Staff, who is a serving officer, with the National Security Advisor? It's a personality, it's oriented, it's a cultural oriented, it's a culture oriented appointment, which we have got to work out as we go in there. Then the existing service commands have to be integrated. And that involves, exactly as people were saying, that they should not be too hasty about it. I think that's not so. For example, I'm taking it at a very low level. A ground liaison officer type B. A ground liaison officer type B, I tried to implement that earlier. He is a person who has been bypassed for command, and sort of it's a cushy appointment for him. I said, look, why not first change his designation? Don't call him a GLO. Call him a GSO2 Ops Air. It's a military designation, but it carries a certain different cadence, if you like, and post a high-grade staff college qualified officer from either the Navy or the Air Force at an air base, because the Air Force, I'm talking of the Air Force specifically, it applies to the Navy also in a little different context. Their chain of command, their organization is different to that from the Army. They have different steps. Their key function is the command of an air base. That is the crux of their command. Ours is a formation command. So there is really no, there should be no issue if we post high-grade officers from, we are referring specifically to the Army, to the air base, which is the normal center of activities of a Air Force formation. Air Force formation starts off at command headquarters and nothing in between up till the station headquarters. There is no equivalent of a brigade or a division or this or that. So the culture is different, organization is different. It is functionally applicable to the Air Force. And that is the way they're making it work. The people who are to work with them from the, let's say, the Army, will have to restructure themselves accordingly. For the Navy, similarly, the Navy's got its own pattern, its own organization, its own culture. The first question, this Peninsular Command came up. I'm glad it came up because it did come up earlier also. And the biggest thing that is, it has not come through, so it is required. It's not come through so far because we didn't make up our mind as to who's going to command it. It is a question of an extra air marshal. It is a question of an existing lieutenant general. It is a question of a vice admiral. It is because these are also career pathways for the respective services. So there should be no problem, or there should be no hesitation in agreeing to these changes of nomenclature in various commands, so that the culture of integration under various names, you do not have to have a particular name for it, takes place within the culture of the existing service. Now, case in point is exactly what was discussed just now, Peninsular Command. It is required. It faces both ways. It faces east, it faces west. Who will command it? Will it be a Navy person? Will it be an Air Force person? Will it be an Army person? I mean, actually, the only Army presence in this entire huge expanse of ocean is the Andaman Islands. I don't see any other Army presence. There's mainly a Naval and Air Force presence. So there is no harm if this is an interchanging command between the Navy and the Air Force. But then you've got to, as I said, it's also a career issue. You've got to have other functional commands which will be commanded by a different service. For example, Air Defense Command, is it going to be an Air Force prerogative, or will the Army also function in this? Because the Army has got massive ground-to-air defense resources now. So all these things are coming in, and it is actually, when we discuss this, we are discussing a change in mindset, a change in culture, and that is otherwise equipment to be brought in, who gets priority on what, that slice of the pie will always be there, because resources will always be short. Resources will always be short, and we will have to make do with what we've got. Now, low intensity warfare, like we have anti-terrorism, counter-terrorism, manning the line of control in J&K, dealing with the Naxalites in the heartland of India. The Army, armed forces are partially involved in it. I believe the Air Force has come into it in their own way. But this is a politico-military structure, and we will have to see how best to go about it. So when we integrate, we are talking about Ministry of Defense, we are talking at headquarters level. The services themselves have to be culturally realigned, so that they can take on the cultural pattern of the people they are working with. And I would like to say, and I've always said it, the Army being the largest service, it must look after its own interest, yes, but it also has the maximum to devolve to the other services also. That has to be worked out. It is usually a very sensitive issue, Many sensitive, personal sensitivities have come in. For example, we had Chiefs of Staff Committee that fell through, being an effective, we didn't have the CDS earlier. It fell through because of the personal opposition from one person or one service. And I make no bones about it. So if that, we have to change our mindset. It's more, integration is a change of mindset. Special Operations Command, these are new commands coming up. These should be tri-services commands. Will it be an Army Special Forces officer? Yes. Or will it be a Naval Marcos officer? Will it be an Air Force Garuda officer? All these people are there now in all services. And when you say special services, you'll have to keep all these people in mind. Integrated logistics, training, we should go cautiously on this, because logistics are not something you can change overnight. Similarly, training systems, we've started off with Army Training Command. We have enough problems with that within the Army itself. So if you want to have a joint training structure, we have got to really move very cautiously, very step. Is it worth it at all? Can we carry on with what the training systems we have, except certain places which overlap? We'll have to look into that. Equipment is another place. We have got limited resources of money, and this, to reduce it to a lower scale, will you buy a tank or a fighter plane? Both are very expensive. Or will you buy a frigate? Money is fixed, and this is where the majority of the rivalry, bad blood takes place between the armed forces. As a matter of fact, in exasperation, I said, for God's sake, you are buying a fighter plane or a naval ship not to put in your garage. You're not spending your own money buying a car for yourself. So this should be on a strictly operational basis, to be adjudicated by the Chief of Defence Staff, one of the duties he'll have. And then again, he'll always be suspect. If he is from the Army, he will say you're favoring, people will say, not he will say, people will say you're favoring the Army. If he's from the Navy, ditto from the other two services. If he's from the Air Force, same thing counts. So therefore, that stigma, if you like, that problem, if you like, will always be there in acquisitions of material from the on the Chief of Defence Staff. But there are certain things which urgently require to be integrated. One of them is intelligence, and this brooks no delay. The sooner we do it, the better. We've left out the paramilitary forces. The largest intelligence gathering organization in the country is, I'm not going to technical intelligence so much, is RAW, is IB, is the police forces. The military intelligence, really speaking, is not very functional because it operates across the border on very low level resources. Intelligence is something which has to be integrated. The faster, the better. This is a vital necessity which we'll have to go into. Then special operations, again, I touched on that. So when you say integrated command, integrated headquarters, Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Defense itself must be, if you like, it may be the wrong word to use, compartmentalized, so that the specific requirements of each service are met. And planning, operational planning must be joint, integrated. Problems of command control equipment have to be sorted out, which is another place where individual egos take place. And that is it is the need of the future. It is the need of the future. Restructured Ministry of Defense is the need of the future, but restructured in an intelligent way. It's basically a human relations problem, something we are pretty bad, always bad at. It's a human relations problem, and I think we will have to take this thing into a great deal of attention and observation has to be paid to this. The various incumbents in a joint headquarters must personally get on with each other. Strange but true. We have got a good basis for it, but we must now exploit it. And I think that is what I have to say today. I'll move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I'm pressing a button. Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, just mute your mic, that's all.
Lalta tipe debo to?
Bas. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Now, gentlemen, in the chat box, I see no queries. So that makes it that I go straight into the summing up, and it's going to be a very difficult one because lots of people have agreed or disagreed with each other. However, I will start with a sentence with which I was going to finish my summing up. That sentence is, there is no runner-up in a war, only the vanquished. Now, talking about the CDS, basically the CDS was put into a role once late Naresh Chandra, who is also the convener of Ceners-K, came back to India, and he held the chairman intelligence committee report as well as chairman CDS's report, CS and the chief of defense staff's report. He's basically the author of these two, and thereafter there have been lots of, let us say, alterations, amendments, modifications, but basically the matrix has remained the same. Now, what I want to come back to is what General Roy Chaudhary initially said about the NSA. 22 rounds of border talks have been held between special representatives, and the NSA has been the special representative, of which the present NSA has himself had 5 times. Not an inch has moved forward. Without the claim lines, people wonder what is he discussing with his Chinese counterparts. The CDS should be advising the government on these mega issues and not become the spokesperson of the bureaucrats and politicians, as some feel in some quarters. I have also read reports that the RM is discussing the Sino-Indian border situation with the NSA. I am taking up from where General Roy Chaudhary left off. What is the duty of the NSA vis-a-vis the CDS? What does the NSA really know about the operational scenario and its escalating matrix in high-altitude terrain? How will he comprehend the unfolding of operations in that area? How will he build up on the force levels, and what will be the logistics required? This is where the CDS advice is essential. Now, I fail to notice anybody touching on COVID. Like all domains, the armed forces will be forced to make adaptive changes necessitated by this COVID reality. The lean, mean fighting machine, the onus of recalibration, the Army's professional essentialities, or rather the military's essentialities and sensibilities, cannot fall on the generalist MOD bureaucrats. One consequence of the COVID that is easy to imagine in the face of a distracted and internally focused at present United States will be the Indo-Pacific nations' greater reliance on security partners such as Japan and India. So we see a Jimpex going on in the North Arabian Sea with the Indian Navy. General Roy Chaudhary also talked about the paramilitary forces guarding the borders. Yes, they've taken on a lot of load from the army, but with taking on a lot of load, there has been a lot of one-upmanship also. The intelligence on the present imbroglio was available as early as in April. However, it was not made available to some of those people who could take decision. I believe it was made available at the highest levels. It is the peripheral tasks and expectations beyond this core of Indian security framework that has not lived up to the parallel performance. Let us take the example of the much talked about Made in India / and oblique or Atmanirbharta. The defense industry has been given the short shrift by most of the speakers. It has repeatedly ensured that the country retains a dubious distinction and vulnerability as the world's largest importer of weaponry. Where does that leave us? The winning USP of tactical and operational competence of this core junior to middle military leadership must be force multiplied with the matching mental vigor, erudition, and strategic thought of the generalship that subsumes the increasingly complex world of symmetric, asymmetric, hybrid, mutative, disruptive, and what have you, institutional perceptions. In today's context, generalship must demonstrate leadership beyond the tactical and operational realm that is managed exceptionally well by the core and envisages the higher order of geostrategic. We know our junior and middle level officers, we know their capabilities. They've done exceptionally well in any and every theater. But what we need of the hour is higher orders of geostrategic, geopolitical, cultural, socio-psychological, and even political impact of institutional action and commitment. The generalship has to go beyond and contribute its own towards the readiness for tomorrow. Air Chief Marshal Raha talked about the 1971 war as an example. I agree. Late Field Marshal Manekshaw goes down in the annals of history as a complete general who did not succumb to political pressures. Instead, he pushed back the establishment for timing, wares, and control levers that were in consonant with basic military requirements, not political requirements. What made Manekshaw so inspirational was his ability to speak the truth to the powers of the day and often contradict the unfounded political assumptions, albeit in a manner that betrayed no political allegiance or preference. Personally, the generalship has to be thus politically literate, sophisticated, but still daringly apolitical in its conduct. Any creeping compromise or perception of political preference could be devastating. Here I come to an aspect of education of military officers. General Roy Chaudhary talked about the National Defence Academy and the jointness starting from at that level. However, I will take it to a slightly higher level, sir. As commanders and staff officers, we are coaches and sentries for our units. But how can we coach anything at all if we do not know a lot more than just tactics, techniques, and procedures, as they call it, TTP? Charles Darwin had a very good theory about the outcome of those who cannot adapt to changing circumstances, which is total extinction with time. In the information age, things can change rather abruptly and warp speed, especially the moral high ground with our regimented thinkers see too far too quickly in our recent fights. So we need to change that particular mindset. The Navy might find that the proposed reorganization will actually be restrictive. However, I can assure Admiral P.K. Chatterjee that the Peninsular Command, once divided, will look from Djibouti right up to the Vietnam and Indo-Pacific and maybe Polynesia and Micronesia too. Now, General Praveen Bakshi talked about a congressional report which actually gives out the pitfalls of CDS system. I had collected these particular reports and all when late Naresh Chandra asked me to help out, sort of a thing. So I had to get various reports from various all places. The central fault in India's civil-military relations lies between the military and the civilian bureaucrats, which is more about the relations between the bureaucracy and the military than the former controlling the latter. After the 2001 post-Kargil defense restructuring, military reformers settled down on a reasonable idea of integrating civil and military bureaucracy by cross-posting officers. But as General Roy Chaudhary brought out, there's hardly a colonel and a major, what impact would he make? It is perhaps entirely to the intransigence of the civilian bureaucrats that even this relatively minor reform could not succeed. The DMA thereafter, therefore, appears to be an initiative for the uninformed community to ensure that by virtue of being a department in the government of India, the military gets to drive policy and not go through as to what they perceive as a meddlesome civilian bureaucracy. But as always, there are potentials of this initiative too. Firstly, the DMA is an uniquely Indian institution, as one fails to think of another democracy that has similar organization. Admiral Chatterjee said there are 55 nations which follow this, but I think there are a few lesser now. This should immediately, however, make us somewhat skeptical. Second, the DMA is based on an underlying assumption that one can clearly differentiate between the military and the defense issues, which is entirely untrue. Both are intertwined, and an attempt to do so will be only create inconsistencies and further turbulence. They are different. Third, and this is one of the most important things that I would like to talk about, the military's education policy. The short and rapid tenure system does not augur well for its ability to staff the DMA. To be effective, the DMA would require military officers to tenure this post for a duration of at least more than 3 years at a minimum. However, that requirement does not comport with the typical career trajectories in the military, all three services. Here I would like to quote Anit Mukherjee's book, which defines this as: 1, lack of civilian expertise in military issues at both the bureaucratic and political levels. 2, an institutional design wherein the military is under strong bureaucratic control. And 3, considerable military autonomy over activities that it considers to be within its own domain. Mukherjee persuasively argues that this has had deleterious consequences for the national security of India. The military generally does not incentivize domain expertise and will have to properly think through policies to groom officers to assume such unique positions in future, which intersects with civilian and military bureaucracies. There is no indication of that as yet being done. So we should not be neither here nor there force. The CDS perhaps should focus on creating a vision document, first of all, before it launches into these theater commands. And I think all of us are of the same view on this particular issue. We do have a system which was left over from the Britishers, but then the Britishers had an overwhelmingly military sort of control. Even the viceroys were chosen from military in the later stages, till 1946, where Sardar Baldev Singh became the first civilian in the Executive Council, military member in the Executive Council. Now let us take the challenges ahead. The problem, as I said, is as much politicians and the bureaucrats steering clear of military turf and refraining from a probing engagement with military matters, especially those falling within the baggage domain of what we call operational. Political leaders will now be more susceptible to military advice without any corresponding increase in their ability to interrogate them or benefit from alternative informed views on these issues. General Praveen Bakshi brought it out very well that the US Congress discussed it threadbare for 7 days and issued a book on it. Gentlemen, the Barry-Goldwater-Nichols Act initially was pushed through by these two gentlemen because of the bickering between the three services of the US military. Mind you, the bickering still remains, but on a much lower level. Equally important today is the military's ability to operate in a new domain of policy making. the military is deeply deficient on this count. My personal feeling, I may be wrong. This is not only because the military was kept out of this space, but because the armed forces conception of professional military education has been narrow, unimaginative, and crimped. None of our military education institutions offers any serious training in international relations or economics, history of public policy. They continue to prepare officers primarily for the operational and logistical roles that have no conception of serious academic training. Unless there is a thorough overhaul of this military education, the military will be unable meaningfully to work into these new structures that are taking shape. Just as we look to other countries to make case for integrated structures of policy making, we must learn from their willingness to put their officers through serious education and prepare them for serving as policymakers as well as soldiers. Major challenge will be to implement the 5-year defense acquisition plan. I have already spoken to it in my opening remarks. This is a weakness that we have to overcome. I really do not know how. Perhaps the defense finance will have to be integrated. I am told that defense finance people have people from, graduates from agriculture, graduates from animal husbandry, and graduates from I do not know what all other streams. How can they ever talk on defense finance? Now, coming to the crux, formation of theater command. What is actually theaterization? We have at the moment around 19 military commands. Having heard the various speakers, we heard Lieutenant General Prakash Menon talk about his 4 commands, the Continental Command and the Oceanic 2 commands. We have heard others talk about generally leaving it at the same level, and a third opinion that we leave it at the same level, we slowly build into it. Right. We have to war game it to a large extent. Specific units of personnel from 3 services, including all the 3 Army, Navy, and Air Force, all under a common theater command which we have to reach. However, it cannot be done overnight, and it cannot be done in the 3 years time that has been laid down. It will have to be war gamed, it will have to be talked about, it will have to be seen how we go through it. I have one particular issue. We have a front in J&K with 2 fronts, Chinese and J&K together. We have to really war game whether 2 different commanders would be a better aspect or one single commander to see both the fronts together. This needs to be war gamed at length. The architecture under which this newly appointed CDS has
So you've been muted. Please unmute. General Roy, you've been muted. Please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now again? I said that the architecture under which newly appointed CDS has been placed and the charter given to him is actually commendable, provided the system lets him do his work. The civilian bureaucracy is relocating for the first time under a military head unit to India. The DMA will correct the aberration of the 3 service headquarters being outliers so far. It will become integral to the MOD, thus facilitating absence so far. The military's role in decision making will now be heard. Wisely, this relocation in MOD has been mandated. Existing single service structures, their charter should remain on. I will not talk too much about what the role of the 3 service chiefs are, but I can tell you the 3 service chiefs in most nations which have got a large force let's take the Russians, even the Chinese and the Americans. Their roles are basically three: training, logistics, and placing and providing manpower whichever, wherever required. These are basically the three commands. And the rank structuring of the theater commands, as and when it comes to, I agree that with certain speakers, it should be 4-star. And the CDS in that case, or Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff Committee, or whatever you name him, should become a 5-star. Now, that way, the control can be maintained over all the generals in this manner. What has happened, unfortunately, it has been mandated that the CDS will not exercise any military command. I do not know, and I cannot fathom why this sentence was added when the CDS's office was taken, including over the 3 service chiefs. It ultimately reduces him to a non-entity, and it equalizes him with the 3 service chiefs. Here lies a rub. He is not in communication with the theatre CNCs. What does he advise to the RM if he is not in communication? The CDS elevated from among the service chiefs will be just should be head and shoulders above the Defense Secretary. Presumably, the government will attend the rules, and I also feel the Defense Planning Committee, where is the necessity of the NSA to head it? To that extent, I agree with the speaker who said that the DMA should be headed by a 4-star and the CDS should be a 5-star, a separate appointment altogether, who should head the Defense Planning Committee. Now, I will end this summing up over here. There are a lot of anomalies which I had written down, but I will speak only of a few. One is already known, the Defense Secretary. I'm Kyoche?
Shesh
Kochi, sir, that's finishing. I only want to impress on two: the defense of the nation will have to come to the CDS, as already spoken by you, and the depth of generalship in the armed forces will have to start getting higher. Thank you very much. If there are any queries, please put your queries and the name to the panelist concerned. Otherwise, I will now stop the recording, which we have been doing so far. Do I have the permission to stop the recording? Both the chiefs, sir. Thank you, sir. Stop the recording. Thank you very much for attending this. I'm very grateful to all of you. We have learned a lot.